What's most remarkable here, and I think this will come up within the conversation, if you look at that pie chart we created, you will see how overwhelmingly what's under construction right now is focused on residential, and frankly, how few office developments there are. That's obviously an issue, but it could be just cyclical. That's one of the issues we want to discuss. Obviously, Jeff, the absolutely perfect answer to is, will traditional demand bounce back? Clearly, we're all very much concerned and focused on that. Will there be demand for their proposed new project at 21st and Market Street? We see Parkway has moved very far forward with a new home for Morgan Lewis. They've almost topped out. And of course, this is a lateral move from 1701 Market Street. At the end of this morning, I want to briefly introduce this new effort we have underway around business attraction, because we think that's going to be a key and necessary part, but we'll come back to that. Will we see the full restoration of pedestrian vitality on our streets? What do the 40 new retailers who opened in Center City in 2020, the 29 more who opened in the first half of 21, and 23 more who've announced plans to open, what do they tell us? What do they know about confidence in the future? I think there are a lot of incredibly positive signs out there. So as our panelists talk about their projects and in Q&A, we hope to really answer some of these questions and others. So we're going to take the panelists in the following order. I've asked Jeff to focus first on office, Clayton Mitchell to focus on all the great work that Thomas Jefferson is doing. Leo Addimando will talk about the retail market, and Paige Jaffe, as I said, will bat cleanup in talking about retail itself. So Jeff, let me cue up your presentation and turn it over to Jeff DeVuono from Brandywine. Jeff, you're on. Just give me one more second. Now, come on up here. Thank you.
Well, you know, you're talking about the topic is coming back to the office, and we had a very small group who was willing to get out of their pajamas, brush their teeth, and come in. So it's an uphill battle. But look, I think what Paul asked me to talk about today was simply what we're seeing in our portfolio and what is driving some of the decisions we're making as a company. Small audience, everybody kind of knows who we are, but this is the point of reference I just want to highlight, which is basically 4 million square feet in the CBD and about 2 million square feet in University City. The data set that we look to is about 200 companies and about 20,000 people who occupy our buildings. So that's the point of reference. So I am truly convinced that office space is not going to go away. Now, some of you are probably assuming that I would say that anyway, because I work for a company that owns a lot of office space in this city, and we're going to promote our own book. So we have some data points here for people that are not in this room, who are a lot smarter than we are in investing real hard capital. So look, Amazon had an impact on retail. Retail's not going to go away. It's going to evolve and change the same way in office space. So I'm just going to go through some quick highlights and some data points that are kind of driving our decision process. And then, as Paul mentioned, we're going to talk on the panel and get a little bit more detail. But this year alone, people have spent $45 billion investing in office space. They're making that decision to invest $1 over another alternative. In addition to that, another group of investors built 38 million square feet of office space, which requires a lot of capital. So people believe that it will return. The question is in what form and where. And Google, the prime example of the people who could probably decide and work comfortably at home, decided to spend $4 billion just recently for an office building in Manhattan. 3 different data points that going into a discussion today, you probably wouldn't think. And why is that? Because culture and community and collaboration are just simply too important. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the panel. So that's why through some surveys through PwC and E&Y, just 13% of the executives think that they're going to get rid of their office space. The majority, and that's the market that we focus on, large trends, not the exceptions to the rules, are saying they want to come back. And almost 90% of the people who work for those companies recognize their value in being with each other. So from our own portfolio perspective, again, 200 companies, 20,000 people, 35%, I call it utilization rate. So if you have 20,000 people and in your buildings and 10,000 show up every day, that's a 50% utilization rate, just as a point of reference. So we basically have 35% of our employee population in our buildings in the city coming into work every day. But when you look at that even further, what's interesting is if you're less than 50,000 feet, it increases to 45%. And if you look at companies that are 20,000 square feet or less and private, not public, or a large partnership like an E&Y or PwC, that increases to about 70%. They don't have the big umbrella to take care of them from an economic perspective, so those people are in there hard charging. So look, I think this is an interesting data point too. So since this all started recently, people have shed about 171 million square feet, or roughly 3% of the overall office inventory. In 2008, in the great financial crisis, it wasn't much less. It was 2% at 104 million square feet. And to date, 76% of the almost 3 million jobs that have been lost have returned. They're not returning to the office yet, but that's employment. And if you don't have a job, you don't need an office, you don't need a lab, you don't need those other things. And what's interesting is what we're really looking at, again, are macro trends. So the gateway markets have seen their demand and tours for office space 4 to 6 times, or doubled in the last 4 to 6 months. It's just not happening in this market as much as we want it to. And we can talk about that further. So the real question to us is how do we capture demand locally is really the challenge I think we have. But from a macro theme, it is coming back. So Schuylkill Yards. Everybody's probably familiar with this project. We have the ability to do almost 11 million square feet from a buy right. Jerry's focus was about 6 million square feet. It started on the far right with Sierra Center in 2005. And the last project under construction right now is the middle dark tan building 3025 West JFK, which is 326 apartments and 200,000 square feet of commercial office space. But what's interesting is when Jerry Sweeney, the founder, CEO of the company, had his first vision for Schuylkill Yards, these numbers were very different. It was probably 4 million square feet of office. It was called 500,000 square feet of residential and retail and very little life science. But in 2021, going into 22, it's completely shifted because the 2 largest employee growth sectors are tech and life science. So we're going to meet the market and demand. What's different about this market today versus what it was when it gestated when the Science Center started is we think of this as one of the best development sites, not just in this city, but in this country. Because the science started with a few people like Dr. Jim Wilson and Carl June and Catherine High, and they were just a couple of lab people with PhDs doing science work at the Science Center. Now they've turned into real companies. Jim Wilson alone has created over $15 billion of market capitalization for the companies he's involved in. That is not just walking from the University of Pennsylvania to a convenient building next door. This is something that it's all about whatever industry you're in. It's a fight for talent. So this has a regional hub between the rail and the road network there. So we've got 3 things going on the life science side, and then I'll be quick and step down. But first off, we're building an incubator. We converted the first elevator bank, floors 1 through 9 of Sierra Center, to life science. That means you can put labs, hoods, sinks, whatever in there. Then we have some other projects that I'll talk about, but people have asked, why do we put an incubator? What Jerry's really focused on is creating an ecosystem. This truly is a pipeline for companies to grow. This is not a WeWorks or a Regis model in co-working where you might start a company and you might grow or you might not, or more than likely you're going to stay the size that you are. This is either going to explode or go away in a lot of cases. So the first step we needed to recognize was we needed to create an atmosphere and an environment for people with an idea, individuals, to go out and start a company and grow their business and be in a community that they can learn from others and gain momentum with. So that's underway. We open up in January. So when lab users come into the market, we can actually accommodate them starting in January of this year. So that's the 2022 solution for space needs. The 2023 solution for space needs is the middle building, the West Tower, 200,000 square feet, half of which can go life science. The East Tower is yet to be determined from a timing perspective. And then in 2024, we'll deliver 3151 West Market Street. So what you've heard on the life science side is there's just a shortage of physical space for people to go to. They're looking around the country. They need a solution. They can see a pipeline in Philadelphia with not just our buildings, but others. You've got Wexford doing a great project down the street. You've got the Curtis Center with Keystone's doing. So everybody's meeting this demand, but we need to give these users a vision for where they can grow in this city. If not, they will go to other markets. These are all the highlights of why Philadelphia makes sense. I'm not going to go through them from a life science perspective. But one thing I want to touch on, this is not a layup. The people in this room, the people in this audience, the people who are not here involved in this have to work with the city and the state to continue to attract business. 1776 is getting a little hokey here, but this city created the Declaration of Independence and lost the ability to have the capital of the United States because of a bunch of real estate speculators in Washington, D.C. They missed an opportunity. They blew it. In the 40s, they started the first computer, but it was below them from the Quaker mentality or the Ivy Leagues. And Stanford and MIT took it and blossomed in these incredible companies. So cell and gene therapy started in this region. Somebody can easily take it away, and we'll talk about it later, but it's a great opportunity. We're in the first inning of it. But it takes the collective efforts of everybody who's here and not in this room to make sure the city has the right policy and the right perspective and the right approach to capitalize on it. Otherwise, Boston, California, they'll come and take it away from us. So we're excited about the future. There's a lot of opportunity, but it's not an easy lift. So that's really it from my perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff. Our next speaker is Clayton Mitchell from Thomas Jefferson University. Really delighted to have him come forward at this point. Let me just leave this screen up so I don't confuse things. Jeff, well, you'll get to speak from Jeff's slide here if you want to embellish on his slide and change the numbers. Thank you very much.
I'm going to time myself here so I can get to your questions quicker, but no real slide deck here. Really just kind of want to talk about the two major Cornerstone projects for Jefferson and Center City. And I'll lead it off kind of really a couple of hat tips. One, Fred Strober over there with Saul Ewing, who helped us put together the Specialty Care Pavilion program, and Dan Killinger with National, who's been a great partner in getting that facility through. So, there's three things that I was hired by Dr. Klasko to do for Jefferson in terms of real estate and facilities. One was build a corporate real estate and facilities capability, which we've been doing. That's sort of in-house among us. Recruiting Dominique Casimir as our VP for real estate was a keystone there. Real estate rationalization and realignment, which is really, Jefferson's grown through mergers and acquisitions over the last 8 years, as everybody is pretty much aware. We potentially have anywhere from 15 to 20% more real estate than we need, not just in Center City, but across the enterprise. And so rationalizing and realigning that, particularly in light of the impending Einstein merger, which will close sometimes within the next 30 days, was the second big deal. And then the third was the Specialty Care Pavilion, which is the largest capital project in Jefferson's history. just base facts. What it essentially does is it consolidates all of our ambulatory services within Center City into a sort of a single one-stop facility. So there's a slide I wish I had here that shows 13 different buildings in Center City that all have Jefferson activities in it related to ambulatory care, all porting into this facility, which is part of the East Market development. We thought, in addition to being part of really a very vibrant development, right in Center City, it's also a catty-corner to our hospital, which gives us a lot of synergies between those two. The second keystone project for us is the Carolyn Kimball Biomedical Research Building, proposed for 9th and Locust. And really just kind of continuing Jerry's riff there. Life sciences research, those are huge opportunities for not only Philadelphia, but Thomas Jefferson University. And we anticipate running out of lab space here pretty soon, within the next couple of years. Growth and expansion, really our ability to attract the best and the brightest is contingent upon us having world-class facilities in order to do that. So I totally agree with the war for talent, and I think the war for talent for us is really focused on making sure our facilities and infrastructure sort of meet that demand. Once we complete the Carolyn Kimball research facility, if you were to look at Locust Street, in a sense, Jefferson will have created a research corridor. Starting with our Hamilton building, which has a lot of simulation capabilities in it, the Jefferson Alumni Hall facility, which has a couple of vivariums and is really one of the core facilities for us for research. Blumley, which is at the corner of 10th and Locust, which is our current sort of centroid, and then the Carolyn Kimball Center, which will be really the flagship of our research capability. One of the things that Jefferson is concerned about is really having a place where researchers can congregate and use sort of as a center of excellence. And so that facility will include a conference center, which will act as a collaboration hub for all of our research activities in Center City. So much lacking for Jefferson at the moment. And it'll also connect to the Blumley building with an atrium that we think will not only highlight and amplify the experiences of our research in that facility, but really sort of have a very dynamic appeal from the street. And I believe that's why we've gained considerable support from West Washington Civic Association and others. So we're pretty excited about those two projects as they sort of launch us forward, and looking forward to taking any questions that you all might have. I think the last thing I'll leave you with, though, deference to Paul here, we as the largest employer of within Center City for Philadelphia, getting our folks back to our facilities is tantamount. Most of our folks who went remote were business support, and so we're trying to get those folks back in. Our academic and our clinical folks never left, and so they've been coming into Center City the whole time. And as we look at things like parking and security, those have become huge dissatisfiers for our employee base. And so we've been working with Paul, the city, Councilman Squilla, and others to really see if we can, in my words, sort of adjust our policies and our approach to how we deal with some of the socioeconomic and security and safety issues in Center City. We think that, again, back to the war of talent, if people are concerned about how their safety in terms of getting into work, that's going to be a huge challenge for us in maintaining, retaining, and recruiting the best and brightest. So from a Jefferson standpoint, Paul and I have had a lot of conversation with that. That's a full court press for us. And you're going to see some big splashes here in Jefferson within the next month, really demonstrating our commitment to really reshape the safety and security environment in the center city core. Some of you may not know, I come from the military. I did 25 years in the Navy. A lot of responses to disasters, Hurricane Katrina, Honduras, Thailand, Jakarta. In every case, once you have some sort of issue that impacts the safety and security of a particular area, particular market, commerce is contingent upon restoring that safety and security. And so, we're thinking about commerce in terms of healthcare and getting our folks here and attracting them to Center City. But we also think that, if we're not an active partner in that quest, we'll lose our battle, we'll lose our war for the talent. And Jefferson's making some huge investments in Center City. We've essentially, rolled the dice. And so these two facilities represent over $1 billion worth of investment. If Dr. Classical were here, he would tell you he is totally and absolutely committed to making sure that, we've got an environment that's going to not only contribute to the safety and security of our folks, but contribute to the vibrancy of Jefferson or Philadelphia as a whole. So we'll stop there.
I really appreciate Mitch raising that issue of public safety. We want to make this question in terms of what are the challenges, one of our Q&A points. But coming back to these first two presentations, I think, Leo, they've made your job a little bit easier. People say, well, where's the demand going to come from for all these apartments? And I think between what Jeff has just talked about and what Mitch has outlined, you can see, I think, the significant confidence that people have. So I highlighted two projects that Alterra has in the core of Center City, but as you know, they're working across a vast area of the city. So it's my pleasure to ask Leo Addimando to come forward to talk about Alterra's projects in Philadelphia. Leo, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. For those who have heard Paul speak before, I was just noting it took a global pandemic to slow him down a little bit. The presentation earlier today was the slowest cadence I've ever seen, which I appreciate, because sometimes your mind spins when you're doing your presentation. So thanks for having me today. I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about the general sort of state of the apartment market in Center City. So rolling back to the end of 2020, Center City apartment demand was very strong. Occupancies were in the 95 to 98% range. Rents were at all-time highs. Then obviously, the world had a great shock to the system. Last summer was probably the end of last summer, last fall was probably the bottom of market demand and occupancy, depending upon what type of product you had and where you were in Center City. You might have been in the low to mid 80s occupancy, which may not seem like a huge deal. I mean, the office market in the city has been in the 80s for a long time, but in the apartment business, when you go from 95 to 85, it's a pretty big shock to the system. And rents probably fell 8 to 10%, depending upon, again, where you were and the type of real estate product you were offering. Fast forward to the spring of this year into now, probably the most robust leasing season and demand for apartments in my 16 years doing it in Philadelphia, which I guess is a little bit surprising from the standpoint that, we are, at least in my firm, we are kind of questioning, where is all the demand coming from? Where is it coming back from? So at Paul's request, we ran, some stats out of our system and talked to some of our peers. And so a couple of things. One, prior to the pandemic, we saw about 50% of all inbound leasing demand coming from outside of Philadelphia based on zip code. So, and then during the pandemic, what demand there was 90% from inside of Philadelphia zip codes. And to today, we're at 35 to 40% going from outside of Philadelphia. So it's interesting on a bunch of different levels. So today we have a little bit less demand, coming from outside the city than we had prior to the start of COVID. So that's interesting. What does that say? It could say a lot of different things, and we'll talk a little bit about it towards the end. The other thing too that we're noticing is that the demographic, especially the age demographic, has shifted in the past couple of years. Typically, we were seeing kind of mid 20 to early 30-year-olds inbound to, A and B apartments in Center City. Now that's really shifted to late 20 to mid 30-year-olds. Part of that is just a general demographic shift, I think. But, it is also an interesting data point that you have fewer people looking to Philly from outside of Philadelphia, and that the demographic is trending a little bit older. So I wonder if those are at all related. And then just in terms of the type of apartments, if I were to say the last 10 years were really characterized by an arms race around amenities, like who had the nicer common area, who had the nicer gym, who had a roof deck, who didn't have a roof deck. Some people built pools. There were all sorts of amenities that, tenants were beginning to expect. I think that going forwards, a couple of trends that we're seeing and some adjustments we're making in our portfolio just to respond to the changing, flavor of demand from tenants. One, I would say for many years, and, Jim did this and my firm did this, you were building smaller and smaller, more efficient apartments. That's probably bottomed out now. And I think it was bottoming out before the pandemic, but that definitely accelerated it. So there's more demand for 2-bedroom apartments now than there was 2 years ago. The apartments are getting a little bit bigger, although not significantly bigger. I just think there are more apartments being built that are not single occupancy or meant to be single occupancy apartments. The buildings themselves are really now being geared more towards a live, work, play. And I don't mean living, working, and playing in the downtown core. I mean literally in the building. So anything that you can do to make it easier for folks to, work from home or not, is becoming more and more attractive, whether it's the way you reconfigure the apartments to allow for work from home or creating very comfortable workspaces in the common areas. The outdoor space, the roof deck is becoming more and more of a must-have rather than just a nice-to-have. And the ability to create actually workspaces in the outdoor setting is also becoming more interesting and important, from a tenant demand perspective. So, we're trying to adjust to the trends. If we can go real quick, the AV guys, to the slide that Paul has, the one that points to all the demand, to all the projects.
One up from my presentation. Sure. This one, right? It's a square footage, right? Yeah. Right.
So this is really the question here, right? I mean, as Paul, points out, whatever it is, 2/3 or more of all the development in the city is residential development. And pre-pandemic, there were a lot of drivers of this. I don't know that the empty nester, reurbanization trend is on the table right now. Although I think long-term it probably does come back as things balance out. But with all the apartments being built, the real question is who's going to fill them, where are they going to come from? And to me, that really just comes down to two things. One, it's jobs and job growth, which is something that's been very anemic in Philadelphia for a long time. I guess in part because of some policy decisions that we've made over the years in the city. And the other one is, is just, it's more around, public safety and just the general attractiveness of Philadelphia, and particularly Center City, Philadelphia, as an urban place to live and work. And we had a lot of really good momentum before the pandemic around everything having to do with the built environment, the pleasantries of city life. And, a lot of that unfortunately got rolled back, during the last 18 months. And it's incumbent upon, not just those in the room and those in city government, but everyone to try to figure out how to regain that momentum, because this is a really bad supply and demand picture right here. This does not pretend a good residential, rental housing market over the next several years, if we don't really get the job growth in the city that that is needed. I'll make one more point. My firm does a lot of development outside of Philadelphia, not residential development, but more industrial development. We're in 20-something other states, and we have actual projects going in 7 states where we're doing some significant ground-up development. And there is not a place in America that we've been to that is more difficult to get through the entitlement process than the city of Philadelphia. You go to places like Dallas, Fort Worth, Nashville, Phoenix, places that had been managing significant population influx and development over the past 10, 15 years, and who've seen significant additional, in-migration through COVID. And the planning process there is transparent. It's predictable. Those are two very important things that we don't have in Philadelphia with planning and development. Okay. And it may take longer, but at least at the very outset, you've got a very good idea of what the steps are and kind of where things can go left or where they can go right. And it's pretty opaque right now in this city, particularly, on the zoning and then on the enforcement front. You've got there's the entitlement process and there's the development process. And, in that process, there's a whole lot of enforcement that could happen, whether it's, on the zoning side or on the construction side. And the uneven enforcement of construction, rules, regulations, codes is becoming a significant barrier, even more so than it was before the pandemic in the city. So it is alarming. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to Paul.
Thank you. As you can see, we asked each speaker not only to talk about the positive,
left the meeting,
the challenges within the market. I think we've talked about the major demand drivers and then who is, what the impact is on other markets. Our final speaker today is Paige Jaffe, the managing general partner, right, for JLL for retail. And really pleased to have her sort of talk about where we see this going. Sorry, I'm just taking one more second. Display size. Full screen. Sorry about that. So please welcome Paige Jaffe. Thank you.
Save the best for last. So retail, I think, all of the speakers today and Paul have set the tone for what things look like. And, I know in my personal world outside of here, everyone says, well, what's going to happen to retail? COVID and the pandemic has destroyed it. That's very much not true. In a lot of ways, retail was changing pre-pandemic. I think the pandemic definitely escalated things and changed certain qualities and characteristics of what retail looks like. But things were happening, in 2019 and the beginning of 2020, even before COVID became, a real issue here. So I think, yes, retail is not going anywhere. It is staying. It will probably look different than it looked a few years ago, and it'll continue to change. The good news is people have money and they want to spend it. There is a significant pent up demand for people who want to just get out and do things. What does that mean? They want to spend their dollars dining, shopping, having experiences that they haven't been able to have over the last 18 months. They really haven't been able to travel. So, the dollars are in their bank account and they want to get to it. There's just a timid nature as to, well, what do we do and how do we sort of navigate through the world of COVID? There are a lot of sectors that have been impacted more so than others. So a lot of you in this room own retail, know it probably better than I do, but the urban markets have been hit extremely hard, much more than the suburban markets. And that's a COVID thing. We have a lot of hurdles, I think, as our city that we need to get through. But this is not just a Philadelphia issue. This is a major urban issue across the country. Everybody sort of talked earlier about, cleaning up the city, and we can all talk about that a little bit later in the question and answers, but that's definitely something we need to focus on, is having control over what our city looks like, making it a safe place that people want to be is the number one thing that's going to get retailers to come to Philadelphia. That's it. We need to want people to be here. They need to feel safe in being here, and they need to be excited about being here. And that will drive retailers to open up in Philly. So unfortunately, we saw retail kind of continue in May. Once the Delta variant sort of became a little bit more impactful, we did sort of see things either come stagnant or come down a little bit. That just is what it is. And I think we'll start to sort of pick back up from there. You can sort of see here, you know, the uptick in vaccinations, the loosening of restrictions, better weather, all of those things have sort of impacted what retail looks like. You know, if you walk the streets on, I'll just say Thursday, Friday, Saturday evenings, if you walk 18th Street, you walk 13th Street, I mean, it is unbelievable how many people are out dining, walking the streets, sitting in the park. So you know, we have to use the weather, we have to use the things that we have to our advantage before, you know, those sort of things go away. You know, JLL kind of looks at what do different categories of retail look like? How do they compare to one another? Who's doing well, who's not doing well? So, you know, we've seen restaurants that have had their challenges, but one of the positives that we've seen and one of the positives that will really help our urban environments are grocers. A lot of you have developed space for grocers in the city. They all continue to be extremely, extremely active. So I think that's definitely a category that we're going to continue to see. Some positives. Because we do have such a great residential population in our core kind of center city, we haven't taken as big of a hit as a lot of other major cities have. And you can see in this list sort of where Philadelphia from an, you know, Market East standpoint, as well as Walnut West sort of look like in comparison to a lot of other cities. So from a retail perspective, if any of you walked kind of some of the neighborhoods during COVID, or even really sort of during it now, so to speak, you'll see pedestrian traffic in our neighborhoods is huge. It's up significantly. A lot of those retailers are doing really well and probably would have never had an opportunity to thrive in the ways that they are now because there are people working from home. You know, the issue that we have when you look at Walnut Street West, Chestnut Street West, Market Street West, some of the retailers, the pedestrian counts just aren't what they used to be. So those retailers are the ones that are suffering more than others. Back to just kind of the grocers a little bit. This is sort of who's looking. We anticipate a significant amount of more grocer deals to sort of happen in 22 and 23. Here's from Paul and his team sort of what the pedestrian traffic has looked like. And we like to study this from a pre-COVID standpoint through sort of where we are today or through the fall, as we get asked this question all of the time from retailers. They want to know the facts. Where are the people? Where are the steps? Where are they going? What are their shopping patterns, etc. So you can see we're slowly climbing back up. But until the office buildings are populated, until we get, you know, Comcast and some of the larger employers to get everybody back in the office, we're going to struggle. And we sort of need the city of Philadelphia to help us get there. We have more restrictions than the suburban markets. You know, people don't feel safe here. They're not here. So if they're not here, they're not using the dry cleaner, they're not going to the nail salon, they're not getting a salad for lunch. You know, the list goes on and on. So there have been and continue to be retail deals being done pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, whatever you sort of want to call it, in a lot of different categories. And I thought this was important to share because, you know, first of all, just to educate everyone that there still is action. There still are people looking to expand. There still are a lot of groups that have capital that want to do deals. Maybe it's not to the velocity that, you know, some of us have been used to in past years, but it's still happening. And I can tell you that more and more retailers are coming to tour the city than they have over the past 12 to 18 months. What we now need to see is a conversion rate of people actually coming, touring, looking at spaces, pull the trigger and do a deal. And that will come with time, but, you know, from a positive perspective, people are out there. Restaurants are doing deals. Quick casuals are doing deals. Retailers, you know, soft good retailers are doing deals. So, and then sort of kind of where do we go from here? I started by saying, you know, retail's not going anywhere. It looks different than what it looked like before. Again, this is not a COVID thing. This is just a cyclical way of life. A lot of the spaces have been consolidating in size over years. You're not seeing as many larger footprints of retailers. You're sort of seeing that mid-level retailer not completely disappear, but there's few and far between of them. You know, the high-end luxury retailers have thrived during COVID and have had some of the best sales that they've had in history. And then some of the off-price guys as well sort of continue to expand on a regular basis. And then the most important thing, which is nothing new to anybody in this room, but it's all about your experience. People have brick and mortar locations for a reason, whether it be a store, you want to go in and touch the item, check a size, whatever it may be. A restaurant, you want to go because you want to have a great experience with your husband, your wife, your friends, your children, whatever it may be. And as long as these type of retailers continue to grow and continue to do things, you'll start to see an evolution of what things look like, and the next new and cool thing will continue to come about. That's it. We don't need to leave.
I want to quickly open it to questions for the audience, but I just want to summarize a series of things I heard everyone here say, and one thing that people didn't say. But clearly the Delta variant really threw us a curve in the summertime. And what I have been hearing from conversations with lots of major employers is everyone in the last month has really begun to make the shift towards requiring employees to be vaccinated. And I certainly urge that at this point. We have clearly seen when employers do that, there's a bit of pushback, people get over it, and that to me is number one key step for recovery. The quicker we get there, the better. I've heard lots of major employers. The question is now, if people refuse to get vaccinated, it goes from they continue to work from home. Some are now talking about it's a condition of employment. So that whole relationship of what the employee wants and the employer wants is being negotiated. But that to me is job one. I think two, as Mitch really introduced the conversation, and Paige and Leo also hit upon it, the issue of public safety is not just a center city issue. There's obviously a neighborhood gun violence issue, but on every commercial corridor. What's most remarkable is all of those commercial corridors, Hispanic, white, African-American neighborhoods, they want clean and safe. And we're trying to organize that effort and work with all the commercial corridors to have that message come. We obviously need responsive policing. We need community-oriented policing, but clearly clean and safe is a mantra across the whole city that hasn't been articulated that I think we need to do. And then I think Leo talked particularly about the barriers to entry, the challenges of development in the city and what we need to do. That's been a longstanding issue. And then obviously more dynamic job growth. We can't solve all of those at once, but it seems to me focusing on vaccination and really beginning a different conversation around public safety is really key at this point. But let me stop editorializing and really open it to questions. Prima's got a microphone here, so please raise your hand if you've got a question. Sure, go ahead. Absolutely. Just please, yeah, just identify yourself. But yeah, thanks.
Hi, Drew Murray here. This is mostly geared or directed to Leo, but all can weigh in. As a resident of Center City, over the past 10, 15 years, I feel like I see less and less families. I live in Logan Square. My assumption and belief is the reason is because single family homes have become so much more expensive. I know in Logan Square, they probably doubled in the last 2 years. When my girls were young, there was an army of mothers and fathers pushing their strollers around. Leo, you were at the same time as my children pushing them around. The natural solution would seem to be multifamily use. Do you see an increase in both owner-occupied and apartments in 3 and 4 bedroom? You talked about 2-bedroom, but do you see an increase in 3 and 4 bedroom apartments and condos, in the next few years?
You're on. Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, look, it's funny. 10, 12 years ago, we built a bunch of 3 bedrooms and they leased and then they didn't lease. And then we built some more probably 2.5, 3 years ago and they didn't lease. And then COVID happened and they all leased. And so now, the whole portfolio, the whole unit mix used to be 50 years ago, it was half 1 bedrooms, half everything else. And then it went as extreme as 80 to 90% studios and one bedrooms. You know, we just finished a building at Broad and Arch. It's the old UGI building. That building has 323 units. It's 85, maybe 90% one bedrooms and studios. The average is like 400 square feet, right? So that was like maybe the peak market, apartment size efficiency. And not surprisingly, during COVID, it sucked wind terribly. You know, it just sat basically empty when it opened. I think there were reasons other than just the pandemic there, but still, you are seeing more and more large units. You know, Jim's been building larger units for a number of years now, especially, in the urban core. You are seeing more of that in the neighborhoods as well. But I think that the bigger question in my mind is those large apartments are very expensive. You know, land is expensive in Philadelphia. The cost of construction is expensive. I always tell people there's only three things that matter in development: cost of land, cost of construction, and the rent. And if those three things don't exist in some sort of economic equilibrium, then the business doesn't work, right? So right now, it's very difficult to make that economic equation work and build larger apartments. Where it works is what you're seeing: expensive townhouses, right? Expensive, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And outside Center City, in the neighborhoods, it is also working in 1 and 2 and even some 3 bedroom, condo for sale type of product. But I don't know that you're going to see a lot of large for rent stuff being built in the urban core, as long as, rents are relatively flat and land and construction costs stay as high as they are. I think there's a need for it, but the math doesn't work.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Paul.
Paul Steinke, a question for Paige, and it's about the Fashion District on Market East. I walked through on a weekday afternoon a couple weeks ago. Happened to be the day that Primark opened, so there was a good crowd. Made it all the way over to Shoppers World. It's not Strawbridge's, but I was surprised at how much of a real department store it really is. And I think the Fashion District is the biggest single retail investment in Center City since, I want to say, the Shops at Liberty Place, which was 30 years ago. And I remember when it opened, I was thinking, God, I hope this works, because if it fails, it's going to send a terrible message about Center City. And then COVID hit. So now we're recovering, shoppers are coming back. What is your take about the future of Fashion District, and does it have a chance to succeed in this marketplace?
Look, I think there have been a lot of positive changes over the past few years that have really helped that neighborhood and changed sort of what retail looks like on the east side of town. I think as more and more people start to understand what is there from a retail perspective, whether it be restaurants or shopping or things of that nature, it will continue to grow. Macerich and Preet, when they were involved, they did a great job. I mean, it's a lot of square footage to fill. They've taken it some off price, some regular price, which from a consumer standpoint on that side of town, I think it works extremely well. I don't think you're going to see, a lot of higher end type things over there, just based on who's shopping and what that demographic looks like. But there's definitely room to grow there. You'll see some turnover, which you would in any sort of setting that looks like that. It's just a large amount of square footage, and it's normal to see, some retailers doing better than others. But the fact that people continue to open, like Primark now, I think it's all positive.
Yeah, I would just add to that, obviously, that while leisure tourism is back and you see it at the Liberty Bell, we've had one convention at this point, which is good, the Shriners. But when that business opens, that drives hotel demand on that street as well. That's a huge missing market. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, Mitch, but why don't you talk about how Jefferson is looking at Market East at this moment and this challenge we face? Mitch, if you're former military, I know you can talk loudly.
Yeah. You don't want me to use my command voice here.
But we look at Fashion Plaza as sort of a front door to Jefferson. That's where the SEPTA station is. That's really because, in fact, it's called Jefferson Station. And it's the front door to Jefferson Center. It is also the nexus of where a lot of socioeconomic challenges hit, whether it was homeless, whether it was, sort of juveniles just cruising through the place and things of that sort. So we've been in deep conversations with the 6th Precinct, with SEPTA, and other stakeholders to really, to use a military term, sort of put a protective corridor around there. And if you talk to SEPTA, they'll tell you they hired about 100 additional custodians to keep the stations cleaned. My initial indications are, there's people have noticed that. We are trying to sort of increase security presence, at least around the station there, but through the Fashion Plaza. I think that the Fashion Plaza is really key to our success in terms of attracting employees into Jefferson Center. I think if for some reason that development fails, it's also going to sort of impede and impact Jefferson to an extent. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship there. And I think the convention center's partner in that whole corridor, and Paul and I have kind of talked about sort of, commerce is the economic engine of a city. And we think that plaza, should it fail, is going to have a significant impact on our brand as Jefferson.
The other thing I would just add, in addition to all the cleaning staff, SEPTA has added additional security on their lines, and they are doing something we're doing as well, this co-delivery model where they have their police with drug and alcohol people working together, so police are not being asked to take on those issues alone. So I think SEPTA is in a position where it does have a chicken and egg. People saying, I don't want to come back because I don't feel it's safe. They add safety, and if they don't get people back, they can't get the frequency. So I think we can break out of this cycle fairly quickly. I think we were talking beforehand, we need 1 or 2 major leaders. And I think I would hope in early October, and within a week or two, we'll start to see some other major employers come back. And there is a follow the leader mentality I think we need here. Jeff, if I could put you,
Paul,
yeah, please go ahead.
There's also somewhat of a parking crisis, at least with Jefferson. We've got 2 parking structures shut, actually 3 parking structures shut down for repairs. There are other parking structures that are shut down in the area too. So we're experiencing a significant crisis, about a delta of negative 450 to 500 spaces. And so a lot of our employees are parking in that Filbert a lot there, and that's a significant security and safety issue there. So we're working to maintain security there, not just for Fashion Plaza, but for the parking that our employees are using.
Jeff, if I could just ask you to come back to this issue. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are starting to focus on the next mayor's election and priorities, but we have 2 years of this mayor. I mean, if you could articulate a kind of your, wish list and what needs to improve to restore competitiveness, I think that would help too.
We don't have enough time and a gavel. Well, look, I'll pick up on Paul's question and some of the response to the retail and then get into that.
Sure.
To me, not discount all the trends in retail that are different and whether or not Maestris and Pre were able to meet the market and the future demands. The obvious elephant in the room to me is job growth. The driver for the people on the streets in that section of town is Jefferson. Was Aramark, now it's Jefferson. Jefferson has to succeed. Other businesses need to go there. Everybody in this room sells a product that is driven off of job growth, whether or not it's an apartment with Jim or Leo or retail out there, or even Steve Mullen doing an economic report. That's the driver. And what this city does, and I think leads to Paul's question, is it does not attract business enough. And it's that simple. Our other markets are Texas and then other places. I was reading Paul's survey. It's great that Philadelphia or this region generated a population growth of 78,000 in the last 10 years. That's great. I'm glad it happened. But in Austin, Texas, where Brandywine has its other major market, that kind of population growth happens within 4 years. And in Texas, it happens within 12 months. They have nowhere near the product. I apologize if some of you heard this before. I view cities and states as companies with a product. We have a tremendous product. Texas, Phoenix, Austin, Dallas doesn't have a rail system that handles 3 million riders. Doesn't have the healthcare systems that Jefferson, Penn, and others have. Doesn't have 80 universities with 400,000 kids graduating every year. But what they have is a very enthusiastic, positive sales team and a real simple model for taxes. Those are the two things that become gating issues for this city. So it has all the potential in the world. And that's why I just rally up everybody to really get active in seeing what they can do to create this opportunity. We talk about life science, and it really is a tremendous opportunity. And we've been traveling around the country trying to get educated on this over the last couple of years and why people are coming here. But, one thing that was kind of interesting to me, there were 3 million, there's about 2 million square feet of active prospects in life science in this market right now. Half of that's CGMP, which is manufacturing. The other half of that is labs. When you go to Maryland, you go to the Triangle, you go to Boston, you go to San Francisco, you go to Cleveland, half of those prospects are all looking in those markets. So it's not 5 different markets with 2 million square feet of demand and 10 million on the aggregate. It's 5 markets with 5 million square feet of demand. So we really have to look at the supply and demand issues. So we have all the ingredients, but look, in this administration, they have to pick up the baggage of preceding ones, right? And I say that at a city and a state level. But what's happened in the past, we can't change, but it's all about job growth. And if we don't change tax policy, be an advocate for ourselves, then everybody here gets impacted. The one stat that I like to quote in Austin, Texas is they have 1,000 people a month moving there pre-pandemic. They have close to that moving there a month post-pandemic. We have 100. So the last time we did this, there were 200 people. We were in the Lincoln Room. And my analogy was, if we were in Austin, Texas, then the 200 salespeople like yourselves who were out there selling apartments, cars, insurance, whatever, you guys made 5 sales that month. In Philadelphia, there were 100 people, 100 sales, and 200 people were fighting over it. That's a difference between economic survival and economic vitality. So, I just don't think we can take a lot of this standing down. We've all got to be proactive in creating more jobs. And this is the greatest opportunity ever coming out of a pandemic. So from a leadership issue, you get clean and safe, you get things under control, you get vaccinations. There is a first mover advantage, and people will see everything that the city has to offer.
Great.
I don't know if
That you answered, Paul. Thank you. Prima. Yeah, thank you. Prima, next question.
I was going to say, in case the group was quiet, and we're glad to see it's not, we'd prepared a few questions internally, and one was for you, Paul. I mean, picking up very much on Jeff's point, there is a real opportunity for business growth. It seems more imperative now more than ever. Will you talk about what CCD is doing?
Sure. This is about as canned as you could get, but we were ready for this one. And I don't want to cut off the conversation here, but because Jeff picked up on this as well, we've been engaged in partnership with Commerce, PIDC, and SEPTA, visiting all the major firms in Center City whose leases are expiring. So retention is job one. People are weighing this issue of return to work. But we really think if you look over the last 5 years, the number of firms from outside the city who have moved in can be counted on less than 5 fingers. All right. And so generating outside demand. So we have launched softly, and it will be ramping up this new business attraction campaign. It is aimed at the New York City market, informing companies and individuals about everything downtown, Center City, and the rest of the city has to offer, both as a place of business and as a place of residence. We're really highlighting our region's much shorter commute time, the ability to achieve a far better live-work balance, and the campaign emphasizes how you benefit from all the advantages of doing business in a dense, accessible downtown at the fraction of a cost of other peer cities. So we're marketing high-performance office space as well as co-working space to an educated workforce, to a vibrant workforce that wants to be here. We're not looking for firms to leave New York City, but everybody who is assessing remote options, we think Philadelphia is a great remote option, whether it's 5 people in co-working or 10 or 15 employees opening the remote office. That's how we think we can get growth. So there are a series of ads that we have started to place, which I'll talk about in a moment, that are really emphasizing the quality of our workspace and our amenities, the much better live-work balance that you have here in Philadelphia, the much shorter commute times. Just on an average, the average commute time is 50 minutes, and many people are commuting 90 minutes into Manhattan. Our average is 36 minutes, with almost half commuting in less than 30 minutes, with a significant portion, almost 40% of Center City residents walking to work. So we are telling that story. We have built a website. You can get to it through our website or through the address phillyworks.com, not to be confused, but very complimentary with the employment training program, but phillyworks.com. And we've got an initial media run. We started it softly with lots of LinkedIn, direct messaging to CEOs and managing partners in the New York market. We are on New Jersey Transit. We will be in Wharton's magazine for graduates. We think that's a large market for people who left the city. And we'll be in the Wall Street Journal the first time on October 13th. And we tend to sort of ramp up, but a lot of social media here. We did this with a competitively selected firm, A, B, and C, but this is something we're reaching out to the brokers and developers. CPDC funded this entirely from reserves, but we're looking for partners in the development community, residential or office development, just to raise our profile outside in New York. We think there are other markets as well, but this is an effort, obviously, to build outside demand. So with that as a sort of deliberately set up primo, there are other questions from the audience. I know we said we wanted to wrap up around 4:45 or 5 of. We got one? Go ahead.
Hey.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm John Keating. So I was just looking at like the sheer number of building permits that were issued this year, and it's kind of incredible. I mean, according to like the federal HUD data, we've had over 8,500 units permitted as of July, and the record last year I think was around like 5,500 or so. Obviously that's partly due to the abatement, but next year is the 10-year anniversary of Philly's big zoning code overhaul package, and it seemed to me that looking at how much permitting activity was happening this year, that effort to really kind of streamline the zoning process has really started to bear fruit. City council has, there are a number of bills kind of pushing back on sort of the legal environment progress that's been made around this stuff. But one thing I noticed was that over the last couple of years, the permitting really shifted from variance cases where people are trying to build sort of outside of what the code allows to like really building inside what the code allows. And kind of contrary to some of the public narrative around this, the builders have really been shifting toward that by right kind of process, with staying within the code, having a shorter process, less kind of political risk around that. And I was just curious to hear, I guess this is maybe a question for a few of the developers here, but what's your thinking about what needs to be done to sort of protect that legal process, and what would you want to see come out of like the next mayor, next city council in that realm?
Leo, could I ask a prior question? Do you have your own indicator of what percentage of buildings got their permits only because of the abatement and don't intend to build? I mean, or is that a serious number, or is it really, as John is suggesting, an expedited process is really capturing new demand? And then the recommendations.
Yeah, I don't think that you have a whole bunch of permits that would never have been pulled. I think you basically pulled forward probably 2,000 or 3,000 residential permitted units,
right? Okay.
From 22 and 23. And
Natalie. Castelny has left the meeting.
We did have media coverage. There we go. That was, thank you.
I think there are,
Say whatever you want now.
there are those who really believe the zoning code overhaul 10 years ago was quite positive. There are those who think it missed the mark. I'll say two things. One, at the core of this controversy around zoning is really the complete lack of cohesive housing policy in the city. You've got no less than 10 different organizations or agencies that are involved in housing policy, but there's no leadership, there's no cohesive strategy. Until you create a housing policy, and then zoning is maybe the second or third thing you have to address after you create that policy, okay? You're gonna have total disagreement and lack of consistency and lack of predictability in the zoning and planning process, whether you're inside the four corners of the zoning code or not. There are a couple things happened recently that never happened before. Council people contesting and winning, overturning by right permits that were not questionably inside the four corners of the zoning code, clearly by right, because they have their own, conception of what is policy or not in their zoning district. So you have a housing problem, right? One of the ways you solve that problem is through density, right? But with density, a whole bunch of other things come, and those things are maybe acceptable from a macro perspective to the city, but they might not be acceptable to a particular council person or neighborhood. And so I go back to the lack of leadership on the housing policy side. I think that's where all of this has to start, a solution for that. Until then, you're going to have mayhem in the zoning process and the planning process in Philadelphia.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I would just, excuse me, I would just add to that. The process has improved and the zoning has improved, but it still pales in comparison to other cities.
Yeah.
What Leo touched on earlier. And you have the gating issue of councilmanic privilege, which is very unique. Few cities have it. It's the trump card. But it needs to improve. I mean, even the fire standards that are through the city today are much better than they used to be, but they're not international codes. They're working towards it. They're doing a fantastic job, and safety is paramount, but we're not on par with other cities.
Paige, any comment from the retail sector on this front, or is it everything's working perfectly for you? Or you have other problems at this moment?
We've got a lot of
Please.
other hurdles, I think, to get through first.
Right.
We
Understood.
have some really great landlords who can navigate the zoning for us.
Gotcha.
I'm just going
Mitch,
to echo Jerry and Leo. So I've only been here 2.5 years. So I've been in probably 5 markets in the past 10 years. Previous market to this, when I was in Denver market for 7 years. And where there's a balance between government, law, and business, this is kind of, I worked on the Hill for a year, and I saw where the best municipalities and the best states were ones that had some sense of balance between government, law, and business. Law being policy. Good law is driven by policy. And to your point, if there's imbalances there, then there's nothing that really governs, what are we solving for? Because that's ultimately, what you're looking to do. And so I think Denver, as a comparison, if you go to their downtown, particularly around the Union Station, and you looked at that 30 years ago and you saw their area plan for that, and you see it today, it looks very close to what was planned at that point in time. And I think that's driven by that partnership, which is ultimately codified in a vision. And so I think that's particularly for security and safety. That vision has to be laid out so we understand what we're solving for, and we can apply resources to the right places, and you can incentivize business, government, law, whatever, to sort of march towards that vision. Until that's not in place, then somebody feels like somebody has the right to lay on a sidewalk and defecate and do whatever. Okay, that might be their right, but it's infringing upon the liberties of a lot of other folks, particularly if you're trying to attract visitors and businesses to your place. And I totally agree that a city is like a business. And it's like, I think about Sim City when I was a kid, and you would do things and maneuver to get more people to come to your city, right? And so we're not doing that in a cohesive and collective way. We're gonna have challenges.
I always joke around, if you want less of something, tax it. If you wanted people to smoke less cigarettes, they taxed it. You wanted people to drink less soda, you taxed it. You want people to have less jobs, tax it. It's the model. To Clayton's point, it's all policy.
So I want to wrap up here first, and please join me in thanking our panelists. This is really, you know, as our first sort of meeting in person, obviously, we've lived through this traumatic experience and we're all sort of processing what I think were the challenges. And I don't take these to be complaints. I think there's remarkable momentum in the chamber. Clearly, major employers, Ready, Set, Philly, and ourselves are working on the security issues. A lot of voices. We're talking about getting together to go visit our district attorney around the retail issue. I think that's clearly something that's really important. People beginning to focus on what we might want from the next mayor. But with the next 2 years, I think we really need to take this opportunity. We've been through an awful challenge. It's really knocked out a lot of businesses, but this is the opportunity for Philadelphia to grow, to grab market share, and it can't be business as usual. We're going to come back in a really strong way and address poverty issues, unemployment issues, let alone the demand issues for all the great projects that are being built. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the intrepid people who came out today. We'll look to see double this number when we meet again in December. So thank you very much for coming.